Undercover boss orders breakfast, stops cold when waitress says hunger has become her normal. A morning diner, a stranger, and a drizzle, just enough to hide something rotting from the inside. Wednesday morning, light rain, tiny droplets cast a misty veil over the fogged glass window of Sunrise Diner, branch number 28, making the signage glow faintly like an old memory waiting to be recalled. The glass door eased open, a man stepped inside, unnoticed. An old flannel shirt, dark jeans, a cap pulled low. His gait was unhurried, not rushed. He looked like a long-haul driver stopping by for something warm or a man on his way, somewhere he didn't really want to reach. But the truth was the opposite. He was Derek Langston, CEO of Sunrise Restaurant Group, the man who once authored the company's core philosophy, kindness isn't service, it's the standard. But this morning, he wasn't here to give a speech. He came to listen, and not to those with titles in the system, but to the ones silenced by that very system. On paper, branch number 28 was a model of stability. Financial reports consistent, payroll on time, no clear red flags in operational metrics. But in the internal reports, the ones only a few had clearance to view, another picture emerged. Resignation rate over the past 3 months was twice the regional average. Anonymous employee ratings only reached 2.75, the lowest in the entire system. A note from HR, data inconclusive. Recommend deeper investigation if pattern persists. Derek didn't wait for more signs. As the founder, he believed every cultural problem is visible if you sit in the right spot, at the right moment, and know how to stay silent just long enough for someone to slip. He picked a small table by the window. Didn't order anything fancy, just a basic breakfast and a black coffee. The diner looked cozier tiled floors, deep brown leather seats, the scent of brown butter and toast wafting through the room. Everything seemed just right. But precisely because of that, Derek grew more suspicious. The atmosphere was too calm, the kind of calm where no suppressed voices are allowed to be heard. He pulled a small notebook from his jacket pocket and flipped to the first blank page. Hadn't written anything yet, didn't need to. He just observed, and he knew something would show itself. Not in the order slip, not on the receipt, but in an offhand comment from someone too used to skipping meals and too tired to explain. Not all truths are spoken aloud. Sometimes, just one passing remark lost between the clinking of silverware and the scent of toastus enough to shake an entire system. The breakfast plate was placed gently on the table. Fried eggs, perfectly cooked, toast still warm, and a cup of black coffee steaming steadily. Everything seemed arranged by a hand well-trained, precise, but not robotic. "Enjoy your meal," the girl said in a soft voice, her eyes briefly scanning him, as if checking whether this customer was the easygoing or the demanding kind. Derek looked up. Cassie, her name tag slightly crooked on the frayed apron. She wasn't too young, but still had the agility of someone in their 20s. A lean face, subtly beautiful if you look closely, but lacking life, the kind of beauty worn down by too many early shifts and too many hungry nights. Derek offered a faint smile, giving nothing away. He picked up the spoon but didn't touch the food. Instead, he asked in a tone of genuine concern, like any ordinary customer, "Morning shifts must be tough, huh? Do you get good tips from customers?" Cassie hesitated. Just for a fraction of a second, her eyes flickered with something like caution, then it disappeared. She smiled, a thin smile, like one pre-installed. "Morning shifts are the worst for tips," she replied, voice lowered as if speaking to herself. "And we still have to split everything, even though not everyone actually gets a share." That sentence fell into the space like a silver spoon, softly landing on tile not loud, but enough to turn the heads of those who noticed. Derek gripped the coffee cup handle just a bit tighter. The coffee was hot, but the chill crawling down his spine was even hotter. He didn't ask more. He didn't need to, because he had just heard something that should not exist. As the person who had designed the automated POS-based tip distribution system, where every gratuity was to be fairly split based on actual service data, Derek had once believed there was no room left for even the smallest injustice in the system. But Cassie had just said something simple, without intent to accuse enough for him to understand. Equally shared does not mean fairly shared. And not really included means someone is manipulating the very tool he once believed to be incorruptible. She walked away to clear another table, leaving behind little trace except that one statement. Derek didn't watch her go. He simply lowered his gaze to the untouched breakfast before him, not because he wasn't hungry, but because he knew the person who had just served it might have skipped breakfast in the very system he created. Sometimes injustice doesn't appear through violence or harsh words. It hides in the quiet actions at a payment terminal, In the way one person is always behind, despite being the one who did the work. Derek sat at the corner table for over an hour. His breakfast went cold. His coffee was refilled twice. He never took a sip. Instead of eating, he observed, his eyes didn't just watch, they remembered every detail. Cassie moved like an irreplaceable gear in the morning shift. She recalled every order, cleared every table, resolved every customer complaint with just the right blend of friendly enough to avoid seeming robotic, humble enough to never appear too assertive. She worked twice as hard as anyone else, and that didn't need a spreadsheet to prove. You could see it in the way she balanced 3 plates in one hand and wiped a table clean in under 10 seconds. But when customers called to pay, Cassie always stepped back. Not once did she touch the POS terminal. Not once did she enter the system. Not once did her name appear on the auto-tip distribution log, where each transaction determines who deserves recognition. Instead, it was Ryan with his spotless white shirt and hair slicked like he was ready for a brand shoot who walked up to take the POS from her hands without a thank you. Jason, too, always appeared when wallets came out, yet never around when tables needed cleaning, water needed refilling, or eggs needed replacing because they were overcooked. Derek opened his phone and logged into the POS oversight dashboard available only to executives. On the screen, he saw clearly, Ryan D. Pause transactions 7 times this morning. Jason M. Erba times. Cassie T. 0. Every table Cassie had served was processed by someone else. A perfect pattern. And that was exactly the problem. Derek didn't stop there. That same afternoon, he returned to the branch posing as someone conducting a sudden POS system audit. No prior notice, no warning. Duck, the shift manager, came out to greet him, wearing a polite smile, the kind of face used to giving everything looks good on paper explanations. Mr. Langston, what a surprise. We always operate by the book. Everything's running smoothly. Then all I need to see is the device access assignment chart. It took Derek less than 5 minutes to find what he needed. In the section labeled POS Access Authorization, Ryan D. Full access. Proposed by Doug H. Jason M. Limited access. Cassie T. No access. Note. Under review. Pending next quarter evaluation. And in the flagged internal message log, flagged confidential. Let Ryan handle the POS for the entire morning shift. Cassie does fine, but best kept in a support role. Avoid complications. Reversing digital tips allocations would be too messy. Derek finished reading. He placed his hand lightly on the desk. At that moment, the only sound he could hear was the steady ticking of the wall clock. Not because the room was silent, but because his mind had gone quiet in a very particular way, like someone realizing that the very system he created had been bent by those who knew how to use small authority to take a large share. Cassie was not incompetent. She had simply been pushed out of the decision-making circle quietly, reasonably, and with full intention. Derek closed the laptop. Every piece of evidence was now clear. Only one thing remained to be done. He stood up and slowly walked around the small office. The room was unremarkable. A desk, a shift assignment board on the wall, a few faded motivational posters hanging crookedly beside a wall fan that buzzed loudly. But it was in this dull space that decisions had been made quietly, effectively, and harmfully. He stopped in front of the shift board. One line written in red marker jumped out. Priority Ryan, backup Jason. And right beneath it, Cassie's name was lightly crossed out with a small note next to it. Not proficient in POS handling, prioritize floor duties. Derek frowned. Since when did serving 10 tables every morning no longer qualify as field proficient? Since when was skill judged by the right to hold a device, not by the results of one's work? He snapped a photo of the shift board, then opened his laptop and accessed the internal training log. Under the trainee mentor section, Cassie's name appeared repeatedly for the past 5 consecutive weeks. So why was someone who trained others classified as not proficient? The answer came quickly from a part of the system few would think to check: the POS Incident Reports folder. A report from 3 weeks ago, submitted by Doug, read, Cassie operates slowly, not suitable for POS during peak hours. Recommend temporarily revoking access to avoid payment bottlenecks. No logs confirmed Cassie was actually slow. No customer complaints. Just a personal recommendation, which the system approved without verification. A realization took form in Derek's mind. Doug didn't need to lie outright. He just had to cleverly construct a false narrative and let it linger long enough for it to start resembling truth. Derek returned to his desk, opened his email, drafted an urgent message to the Internal Legal Center and the Systems Development Department. Subject: Request to review POS Access Protocol, Branch number 28. Body: Evidence of system manipulation via internal operational reasons to distort tip distribution. Recommend temporary suspension of managerial POS access at this branch for 48 hours for in-depth investigation. Sender, D. Langston, CEO. But before hitting send, Derek added one final line. No bold. No caps. Someone may go hungry because of life, but no one should be hungry because the place they work at stole what they rightfully earned. He hit send. The room remained the same. The shift board, the buzzing fan, the white fluorescent light. But the air had changed, because for the first time, someone had stood tall in that room and called things by their true name. Azazen. Some mornings begin with the smell of fried eggs and fresh coffee, but some mornings begin with a truth that can no longer be hidden. Friday, 7:28 a.m. It wasn't raining, but the atmosphere inside Sunrise Diner, branch number 28, was strangely humid-like. Everyone was bracing for a storm they didn't know was coming. The morning shift started as usual. Cassie was clearing table fear. Ryan stood behind the counter adjusting his collar. Jason was scrolling on his phone while the coffee machine dripped steadily. Duck, the manager, was checking the morning supply order, a toothpick in his mouth, wearing an expression of complete control. And then, the door opened. Not the familiar bell announcing a customer, but a firm, decisive swing-ushering in three people in internal audit uniforms. Behind them was a tall man in a plain white shirt. No tie at his presence silenced the entire diner in an instant. Derek Langston. No disguise. No need to hide. This time, he stepped in as himself, not to observe, but to confront. Apologies for the interruption, he began, his voice steady and clear without needing to be loud. We'll only need a few minutes, but these few minutes are worth everyone's attention. Doug stepped out from behind the counter, forcing a smile. Mr. Langston, is there a problem? Yes. Derek cut in coldly, but with no room for evasion. Gestuurd. An auditor opened a laptop and connected to the wall-mounted screen normally used to display the breakfast menu. Now, it showed 3 columns of data. Server, pose operator, tip record. The name Cassie appeared 12 times in the first column. But in the next 2 columns, every entry read, Ryan D. At the bottom was an excerpt from an internal message. Let Ryan handle all the POS. Cassie does well but doesn't need the tips. It'll mess up the books. Derek turned to face all the staff and the customers who had fallen completely silent. Their breakfast now part of a scene they hadn't intended to witness. We built a system designed to reward the right personot, the one closest to the manager, not the one best at holding onto a device, but the one who actually does the serving. And today, I regret to say, he paused for one beat, locking eyes with Doug and Ryan. That system has been exploited. No one said a word. Derek took one more step forward, lowering his voice, but the weight of every word seemed to land directly on the listeners' spines. Tips have been taken from the hands of those who truly deserve them, and that ends today. He turned to the audit team and nodded. 2 file-clipped envelopes were handed out, immediate termination notices. Doug turned pale, and Ryan stood frozen. No one defended themselves. There was nothing left to say. Derek looked toward the customers. Breakfast today is on the company, as a sincere apology, not just because those who served you were treated unfairly, but because we failed to uncover it sooner. He turned back, his final glance resting on Cassie, who was still standing beside table 4, one hand gently resting on a chair back, as if steadying herself. Derek gave a nod in order, not a declaration. Just the nod of someone who had truly seen her. Doug inhaled sharply, trying to salvage the last thread of authority. I was only doing what kept things running smoothly, he muttered his first words that morning, but they carried no weight now. Derek turned back slowly, almost like he'd been waiting for that line. Smoothly is not a reason to sacrifice fairness, he said. If a system requires someone to go hungry just to keep the rest looking good, it's not a system, it's a lie. Each word landed not harsh, not scolding, but like iron stakes driven quietly into the ground. The mood inside the diner shifted, not silent discomfort anymore, but awakening. An elderly customer in the back set down his fork, then slowly clapped once. No one followed, but that single sound was enough to break the invisible shroud that had blanketed the diner for far too long. Cassie was still standing there, but this time, she no longer needed the chair to steady herself. She stepped forward just one step closer to Derek. Mr. Langston, she said softly, I didn't think it would come to this. Derek tilted his head slightly, his eyes softening. None of us did, he replied. But what matters is you spoke up, even if just once. And that changed everything. The audit team resumed their work collecting access cards, logging equipment. A few other staff members drifted toward Cassie. They didn't speak, but their eyes said it all. They'd known all along. They'd been silent too. But now, they knew they couldn't stay silent anymore. The digital menu board overhead flickered not from a glitch, but as a transition. The HQ tech team had just updated the interface with a new announcement. The real-time transparent tip tracking system starts today. Every server varies services logged directly. Fairness is not a slogan, it's action. Derek looked up at the screen, then turned to the young woman still standing as if she couldn't quite believe this was real. Come back tomorrow, he said. Not just to serve, but to begin redefining the value of someone who stands in the middle of this diner. Cassie pressed her lips together. For the first time, not to endure, but to hold back an emotion rising from somewhere deep inside. Yes, I will. And with that, she was no longer just the ignored morning shift worker lost in a back-end report. She was the person at the heart of change, not by luck, but by courage. Fairness is not a reward for compliance. It is a right to be recognized, and sometimes it must be reclaimed. Through the quietest kind of bravery, exactly 1 month after that turning point morning, Sunrise Diner, branch number 28, was no longer the same creaky operation with mismatched rhythms, not because the floors were replaced or the signs upgraded, but because the atmosphere inside had changed. On the wall above the main counter, a small digital display glowed steadily like a heartbeat. Live tips display, transparent, real-time, fair. Every table served, every POS transaction, clearly showed who did the work. Staff no longer had to guess who got the tips. Now, they just needed to do their part, and the system would protect them. Among the gentle sounds of breakfast, cutlery softly tapping dishes, the coffee machine humming cheerfully, a man quietly stepped in, needing no introduction. Derek Langston. No coach, no disguise, no audit team in tow, just him, returning like any other guest. He sat down at the same table by the window, where he once heard a single sentence that changed an entire branch. A black coffee unsweetened was placed before him, along with a smile that wasn't part of any service training anymore, but a real, one warm, steady, and laced with a quiet pride. Good morning, Mr. Langston. Your usual table is ready, Cassie. But this time, the name tag on her chest no longer read staff. It read manager, Cassie. Her hair was neatly tied up, though a few strands still fell softly with each movement. Not from haste, but because she no longer needed to hide her presence. She didn't just stand in this diner, she belonged here. Thank you, Cassie, Derek nodded. And thank you for not staying silent. She smiled, said nothing, just refilled his coffee cup and stepped away, leaving behind a lightness in the air, like a table just wiped clean of old dust. Derek lifted the cup, the familiar aroma rising. But this time, it wasn't just the bitterness. It carried something else, a note that only appears when the right person is placed in the right role. When a girl who once went 2 days hungry can now make sure others never have to choose between dignity and a meal. He took a sip, not to start the day, but to close a chapter with the quiet certainty that justice doesn't always need to be shouted. It just needs to be poured into the right hands and tasted by someone willing to listen. Derek set the cup down, eyes still scanning the space moving around him. Rhythmic, steady, but unhurried. A group of staff divided their serving zones without needing instructions. A young girl named Mai, a new intern, paused uncertainly as a customer asked to change their order. Cassie stepped in not to take over, not to point, just whispered something that made Mai nod, smile, and keep going. Leadership doesn't always stand at the front counter. Sometimes, it simply knows when to stand beside someone. Cassie understood that, not from manuals, but from everything she had endured. She didn't lead with authority. She led with the memory of someone once left out of the system, who once asked herself each night, when will I finally count as part of this place? She doesn't ask that anymore. She's the one answering now. Derek looked up at the digital board, saw Cassie's name appear under a freshly processed receipt, alongside another name, a sign of the new team-based tip-sharing initiative she had proposed to make sure that the person carrying plates, wiping tables, or pouring water was reflected in the end-of-shift rewards, not equally divided, but fairly distributed. He asked himself, if that day Cassie hadn't spoken up, even just a brief and hesitant sentence, would he still be sitting here now, drinking a cup of coffee that no longer tastes like standard procedure? Probably not. A soft chime rang. A new customer walked in. Cassie turned around and smiled, not out of politeness, but because she truly knew The person who just entered would now be served by a system that had been redefined by those who were once overlooked. Derek watched, then took another small sip. This time, the coffee wasn't bitter. It was warm, deep, quiet, like trust when it's been restored in the right place. Because in the end, what we build won't be remembered for its scale, but for a person in a small place who was no longer left behind.